I'm going to talk to you today about building a global startup, which is counterintuitive really when you think about a 32-year-old agency that's a $100 million business. But our agency last year, our owners, recommitted to being global. We looked at our global footprint, we looked at our $100 million business and said, you know what, we're going to dare to aspire to more. We've got a great geographic coverage for a startup, 5 continents, 9 countries, and our size is neither boutique, so we're over 50 million and we're in more than one line of business, but we're under 200 million, so we're not a behemoth. So we're kind of in the middle, so we have an opportunity to grow and to do something special globally and to compete both up and down. The rebranding, which you see on the right, taking Melissa and Pam, our founding partners' names off the door and rebranding to we, gave us permission to aspire as a leadership team beyond what the founders of the firm created over 32 years. So we have a permission to aspire to be a global agency and to start to play in places where maybe we haven't previously. To that end, we have to have some clarity, though, because you don't want to give carte blanche to people that don't own your business, like me. You want to keep some handcuffs on them, but also allow them to run. So we committed clearly to 4 things. The first thing we committed to is independence. We're staunchly independent. We believe in the competitive advantage of independence. We're not going to sell. We're buyers. We're funded, so I'm happy for PR businesses and digital businesses, especially with those depressed margins. Love that. Don't worry about your valuations. So we're independent. We're going to stay independent. We also want to compete, and this is really important to us. We want to compete locally, and we want to compete globally. We want to compete globally as a boutique in our core businesses, which I'll touch on in a minute. We also want to compete globally. Now, we're right now in an interesting position. It's what I call the mushy middle. We're neither boutique nor are we behemoth. So we have to get very comfortable in how we view the markets. So we want to view the markets very locally, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and compete strongly locally against boutiques. We also want to start to build relationships with procurement so we can play against the big holding companies when they tie up procurement-based deals, which aren't necessarily value-driven. We believe, anyway. We also want to compete on speed, and I think that's a great independent advantage. I certainly saw Burson Marsteller not compete on speed, lose on speed. I also saw Edelman compete very effectively in the early years on speed, and now I believe that we have speed, and that's speed to market, speed to try, speed to innovate, speed to fail, and course correct, in particular when you're working with smaller businesses. It's much quicker to turn a ship and make a course correction when you're a smaller business. We will also compete viciously on price. Viciously on price. I've told our guys around the world we will never lose on price. Now that's two-edged. That doesn't mean I'm going to cut price. That means what we're putting on the table in terms of bold solutions for our clients are so good that a lower priced product isn't going to beat us. Now that's a tough proposition. We have to balance that aggressively, but that's part of the ethos of what we're doing. And finally, we want to innovate for our clients and for our people. And when I say innovate for our people, we want to be able to give our people enough time so they can be in the marketplace understanding what's happening in the media ecosystem, so they can try new technologies that are coming up and innovate with them in the office. We're doing in our London office right now, experimenting with virtual reality and doing 360-degree cameras. And we're giving our guys enough time to do that stuff so then we can see what's applicable to our clients. And we're doing it without timesheets, which, by the way, I hate. And I'm happy to talk about that ad nauseum. I never talk about billability. It makes me sick. It's a crazy, crazy measure. It takes your focus absolutely on the wrong things, puts your focus on the wrong things about your clients. And that's what happens when you get too big to behemoth size. So those are our points of clarity. Now, what's a little bit more important to me is our leadership philosophy and culture. And this is what Julian talked to me about when we talked Friday about coming in. I think there are 3 really important parts to what we're doing in terms of leadership and culture. The first thing is we want to be global, but we want a market up orientation. And when you think about this, you think about We have American global firms with an American point of view, Hill and Knowlton. Never mind the British bought them. We have British firms with a British global point of view, which make it very narrow next week. A British global, they told me not to joke about politics, I'm sorry. A very narrow British global view, think Saatchi and Saatchi. We have global networks, French, think Havas Publicis, with a very French point of view. Same thing with the Japanese and Dentsu, I heard Dentsu referred to earlier, and now the Chinese with Blue Focus. I think what we're trying to do, because our business outside of our largest client, and we were built around a single client proposition, Microsoft, over 32 years. And that helped us build the global footprint we have now that we're trying to grow. But what we're trying to do, our business is equally sized outside the United States and inside the United States, outside of our largest client. And then when you look at our assets that are outside the United States that are all roughly the same size, the UK, Australia, Germany, South Africa, China, India, Hong Kong. They're all roughly the same size. So we're trying to infuse a culture that encourages our people to share experiences, to share points of view so we can have an offer that resonates with the brands we aspire to work with. Whether those are local brands we want to take global or global brands we want to work with effectively, implementing locally, which allows us to have a strong value proposition in local markets where hopefully we can sow some seeds of doubt about the strength, consistent strength of networks who have sold into procurement as a global solution. The second part of culture that we're focused on is the relentless pursuit of the possible. And as I go around the world and talk to our folks, I talk to them all the time, and I say, are you right now, this very moment, relentlessly pursuing the possible for your client? And are you relentlessly pursuing the possible for your career? And are you relentlessly pursuing the possible for the agency? And I believe we can do this because I don't focus on billability and I don't focus on timesheets. And I encourage our people to be out in the marketplace and to look for multiple solutions. And because we're independent like you, we can partner with anyone we want to partner with. And we have a formal partnership program called We Plus that allows us to play bigger when we need to play bigger, across lines of business where we don't exist or lines of business where we don't have scale. So experiential, media buying, some programmatic, some web design, those kinds of things. It also lets us play hyper local when we need to be very local in a market and maybe we're not quite as local as we want to be. So the notion of the relentless pursuit of the possible. And then we've got a last part of the culture that we drive, which is inspired by Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath. And I call this, What Would David Do? Because we are, against the big guys, David. And David was a badass because David saw Goliath and he looked from a distance at Goliath and he said, you know what? Goliath's only going to win in up-close, hand-to-hand combat. He is not going to win from a distance, and I'm a shepherd. And I have to protect my flock, and I'm great from a distance with a slingshot, and I have a deadly aim. So David started to think, how can I beat the big guys with a fast weapon, with great aim, and from a distance? So when we go into competitive pitches, we have to be David. More often than not, we have to act like David because we are competing against people bigger than us most of the time on our remits. Not all the time, but most of the time we're playing in a bigger league. So we have to think like David, which again gets to that notion of partnership. It gets to the notion of the relentless pursuit of the possible. It gets to the notion of competing viciously on price, not losing on price, and on also making sure we're bringing innovative solutions from the bottom up, as David would, from the smallest unit up to the largest. And that's what I have for you today. Melissa sends her regards and her apologies for not making it today. She was doing another key part of our culture, which is what we call social innovation. And she's in Africa with a family she'd sponsored for many years in Ethiopia. And now her daughter's carrying on that tradition, doing a medical residency at a hospital there. So she sends her regards. And thank you, Julian, for having me. And I think I've got a couple moments for questions, right? So happy to take a couple questions. We have them.
Just to understand the leadership team, you referred earlier to the leadership team and how that is at the moment and how that's changed over the years.
I can speak a little bit to the years. I mean, the leadership team initially was a CFO and the two founders, right? I mean, they grew it from nothing to $100 million plus. In the last, say, 24 months, in line with the rebrand, Melissa has tried to put in a leadership team that reflects the U.S. domestic business, the non-U.S. business, the marketing and kind of support area, the CFO, and that's reflective of the leadership of our largest client, which is Microsoft. So we try to have a pretty balanced team, and then I actually try to make sure we've got good representation from each geography on my direct team. But you know, the important thing I think for me in leadership in these discussions is I talk to my direct reports every day, like for 5 minutes. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to bring is multiple interactions, multiple days. So even I'm just, hi, how are you? I won the basketball bet last night, which I have with the guy that runs Asia. Hopefully I win again tonight. But those multiple conversations, I think, helps them get in a rhythm with you and me get in a rhythm with them about what's going on locally, who are they competing with, what are the pitches coming on, what resources can we bring to them that they don't have, that kind of stuff. Yeah?
Yes, that's easy. Thank you.
I had one which was just, I want to interrogate this competing viciously on price.
Yep.
And how your team understand that, because at first hearing, it sounds like you're talking about price cutting or
Yep.
discount pricing.
Yeah, it's not, and that's a good distinction. However, the hyperbolic value of that is important. So when I did my first tour across our geographies, I heard a lot when I said, hey, why are we winning, why are we losing? I heard a lot why we were losing. And I'm like, we're losing on price? And they're like, yeah, and I'm coming from, you know, an evil big competitor, right? Not evil, but a big competitor, right, that we try to paint a little bit as evil. And I'm like, we shouldn't lose on price ever. And I'm like, I think your issue here is the quality of your product or the confidence in your product. Something is out of whack there. So I never, ever want you to lose on price. So I've turned up the volume on that to say viciously compete on price. We have our finance people to make sure that we're not gonna go too crazy, right? But also, my focus is making sure that we put a good quality product on the table that's innovative and ticks off the other two key parts of the culture, right? But it's great for hyperbole and clients love it.
Brian McGurk, Brand Create, Dublin, Ireland. You talked about, I think, really micro, local connectivity and the ability to deliver at a very local level as well as scaling up globally. How do you manage the relationships, the chemistry there, and keep that all warm and motivated if in a certain geography over, you know, a sustained period of time you don't actually have, you know, a strong active client portfolio, given that you're a global agency, so you're not active everywhere all the time in a sustained way? How do you manage that kind of motivation?
That's a great question. The first thing is our client base is roughly, let me just use Asia as an example because those facts are in my head. I think we share roughly 30% of our clients across geographies in Asia. So 70% of the client base is local in our Asian markets. So that keeps a very strong local base and it keeps the local guys engaged. And it also keeps them hungry. You know, a lot of the bigger agencies say, you know, especially with Chinese businesses coming out, they want to try to have a 50-50 mix in their local markets of local clients and multinationals. I don't necessarily want to get to that point because I believe, again, from a bottoms-up mentality, having strong local roots is going to help you compete over the long term as long as you have an infrastructure globally to sew that together. And that's really where it gets tricky again for us in the mushy middle. That's the tricky part for us right now is sewing that consistently together.
Thank you.
Yes, lady over here.
Here we go.
Oh yeah.
I did used to play netball as a girl.
Right on.
It's Libby Child of Greengrass, and I've actually, unsurprisingly, got a question about culture, and it may be going back too far into the midst of time, but interested that actually the founding client and the sort of driving client was Microsoft. And as you've grown, I've just wondered how the influence of client culture on the early days of the agency culture, you know, happened, because I think everybody that's running an agency around this room knows how important or detrimental on occasion the impact of certain clients can be on one's own culture and creating that balance. So you can take it as a starting point and perhaps make it a more general question if you want.
Yeah, you know, I know Microsoft well because they were a client at my former agency. And I was, it was interesting for me to observe how many parts of Microsoft culture, how they do meetings, how they write ungodly long emails, how they measure their financial performance. It's interesting to see how many of those things were still, if not dominant in the agency, certainly around in the agency. And I think to a certain degree, that's healthy. Because you want to be aligned with your largest clients, right? So I think some of that's healthy. I think at the same time, we could probably exert a little bit more influence going back the other way in terms of culture modernization and approach to the business and those kinds of things. So it's prevalent for sure. It really is something I've noticed in my first 3 months. Not necessarily a bad thing, though. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks very much.